Shuddha Bhakata Charanarenu Bhajana Anukula Bhakata Seva Paramasiddhi Premalati Karamula Bhakata Seva Paramasiddhi Premalati Karamula Madhavati ti bhakti janani jatane palana kori Madhavati ti bhakti janani jatane palana kori Krishna basati basati boli parama adara boli Krishna basati basati boli parama adara boli Gora Maharaja Sabastane Sakoralo Bhamanarange Gora Maharaja Sabastane Koralo Bhamanarange Sesabastana Heri Boami Pranai Bhakata Sange Sesabastana Heri Boami Pranai Bhakata Sange Mridanga Bhadya Sudnite Mana Avasara Sadajache Mridanga Bhadya Sudnite Mana Avasara Sadajache Gaura Vita Kirtana Suni Anande Hridaya Nache Gaura Vita Kirtana Suni Anande Hridaya Nache Jugala Murti Dekhiya Mora Parama Ananda Hoya Jugala Murti Dekhiya Mora Parama Ananda Hoya Prasada seva karite hoya sakala prapancha jaya. Prasada seva karite hoya sakala prapancha jaya. Jedina grihe bhajana dekhi grihete goloka bhayo. Jedina grihe bhajana dekhi grihete goloka bhayo. Charana sedu dekhiya ganga sukana simana paya. Charana sedu dekhiya ganga sukana simana paya. Tulasi dekhi duraya prana madhava toshani jani. Tulasi dekhi duraya prana madhava toshani jani. Gora priya sakha sevane jivana sarthaka mani. Gora priya sakha sevane jivana sarthaka mani. Bhakti vina Krishna bhajane anukula payaja. Bhakti vina Krishna bhajane anukula payaja. Pratideva se parama sukhe shikara karo yeta. Pratideva se parama sukhe shikara karo yeta. Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. जय श्री श्री गौनिताई की जय, श्री श्री राधा मदन मोहन की जय, श्री श्री जगन्नाथ सुभद्रा बलदेव की जय। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी, गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी, गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी, यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन, यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन, यमुना तीरावनचारी, यमुना तीरावनचारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय ओम विजुपात परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद् हिस्मांगदेश ऐसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विजुपात परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद् हिस्मांगदेश श्रील भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। आनंद कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नामाचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम सिखो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंज गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय। मायापुर नवद्वीप धाम की जय। जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। श्रीमती तुलसी देवी की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। श्री श्री राधा मदन मोहन की जय। श्री श्री गौनिताई की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ सुभद्रा बलदेव की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद जी। All glories to the Sambadevatis. All glories to the Sambadevatis. All glories to the Sambadevatis. All glories to Sri Guru Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasavutade. Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namani. Namaste Saraswati Devi. Gauravani Pacharini. Nirvesesha Sunavadi Paschata Vedatarini. We are reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrith. That is the second volume. And we are reading from the 8th chapter entitled Planting the Seed. Howard later on became Hayagriva Prabhu. He says, I awakened 3 or 4 times, and each time I am flat on my back, looking up at the stars, which are always in different positions. My sense of time is confused. The sidereal shifts dizzy me. Then, just before morning, I dream. I dream of devotees clustered about a beautiful golden youth. To see him is to be captivated. His transcendental body radiates an absolute beauty unseen in the world. Stunned, I inquired, who is he? Don't you know? Someone says, that is the Swami. I look carefully but see no resemblance. The youth appears around 18, straight out of Vaikuntha, the spiritual world. If that is Swamiji, I wonder to myself, why doesn't he come to earth like that? A voice somewhere inside me answers, people would follow me for my beauty, not for my teachings. And I awake, startled. The dream is clear in my mind, more like a vision than a dream. I feel strangely refreshed, bathed in some unknown balm. Again, I see that the constellations have shifted and that the dimmer stars have faded into the encroaching dawn. I remember Swamiji telling me that although most dreams are simply functions of the mind, dreams of the spiritual master are of spiritual significance. Keith also had a dream that night. Keith says, later on Kirtanananda Swami, I saw Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna was inquiring from Krishna, and Krishna was reciting the Bhagavad Gita to him. Then that picture faded out, and the images changed. And there was Swamiji, and I was kneeling in front of him, and the same dialogue was going on. I had the understanding that now is the time, and Swamiji is presenting the same thing as Krishna, and we are all in the position of Arjuna. The dream made it very clear that hearing from Swamiji was as good as hearing from Krishna. End of quote. The sun rose over the mountains, streaking the morning sky above the lake with colors. Wally and Keith were walking around the grounds, saying to Prabhupada how beautiful it all was. We are not so concerned with beautiful scenery, said Prabhupada. We are concerned with the beautiful one who has made the beautiful scenery. End of quote. Later, Prabhupada sat next to Bruce in the Volkswagen returning to the city. The car went winding around on a ribbon of smooth black mountain road with lush green forest close in and intermittent vistas of mountains and expansive sky. It was a rare occasion for Bruce to be driving Prabhupada in a car because none of the Swamiji's boys had cars. They would always travel by bus or subway. It seemed fitting for the Swami to have a car to ride in, but this was only a little Volkswagen, and Bruce winced whenever they hit a bump and it jostles Prabhupada. As they wound their way on to the mountains, Bruce recalled something he had read in a book by Aldous Huxley's wife about the best places for meditation. One opinion had been that the best place to meditate was by a large body of water because of the negative ions in the air. And the other opinion was that it was better to meditate in the mountains because of you are higher up and closer to God. Is it better for spiritual realization to meditate in the mountains? Bruce asked. Prabhupada replied, "This is nonsense. There is no question of better place. Are you thinking that God is up on some planet or something and you have to go up high? No, you can meditate anywhere. Just chant Hare Krishna." After some time, the drive became tiring for Prabhupada and he dozed, his head resting forward. Bruce walked with Swamiji up to his apartment, opening the door for him, adjusting the window as he liked it, and preparing things in his room, as if he were the Swami's personal servant. Prabhupada settled back into his Second Avenue apartment, feeling pleased with a visit to Ananda Ashram. The kirtan had been successful, and one of Dr. Mishra's former students had commented that he was impressed by Prabhupada's followers. Simply by chanting, they seemed to be achieving an advanced level of yoga discipline, whereas we have more difficulty with all our postures and breath control. The United States recently increased involvement in Vietnam was creating an increase of opposition to the war. On July 29, American planes had bombed North Vietnam's two major population centers, Hanoi and Haiphong, an escalation which brought expressions of regret from several allied countries, including Canada, France, and Japan. United Nations Secretary General U Thant openly criticized America's policy in Vietnam. Further opposition to the war ranged from the U.S. Senate down to newly formed pacifist groups, and dissenters held peace marches, sit-ins, and rallies in protest of the war and draft. You know what is draft? Draft is compulsory. The government is taking the boys and sending them to Vietnam for the war. That is called draft. Religious protest was led by Pope Paul VI, and the World Council of Churches decried America's involvement in Vietnam and called for a halt in the fighting as the most effective step towards negotiation. On August 6, the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, there were demonstrations in many major American cities, including a peace vigil at the United Nations headquarters in New York. On August 31st, there would be another 2-week-long peace vigil before the United Nations General Assembly building, and Mr. Larry Bogart had invited Prabhupada and his followers to open the vigil of praying for peace. Larry Bogart, who worked at the United Nations headquarters, had become friends with the Swami and had volunteered to his help by arranging to print stationery for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. The letterhead was designed by James Green with a sketch of Radha and Krishna, and Mr. Bogart's name also appeared on the stationery at the head of the list of ISKCON trustees. Prabhupada accepted Mr. Bogart's invitation to the Peace Vigil. Prabhupada saw it as an opportunity to publicly chant Hare Krishna, so he was glad to attend. He announced to his congregation that Monday, the 31st, instead of the usual morning class at 6:30, everyone should meet at the United Nations headquarters for a special kirtan. August 31st. Some met at the storefront and went by bus carrying kartals and a tambourine and the Swami's bongo. Bongo is the African drum that Prabhupada was using. Swamiji rode with a few of his followers in the taxi. The typical dress of his followers consisted of well-worn sneakers, black pants or blue jeans, and T-shirts or button-down sport shirts. Traveling uptown in the early morning put the boys in a light-hearted spirit. And when they saw Swamiji at the United Nations in his flowing saffron robes, they became inspired. Swamiji began the chanting, but right away the Peace Vigil organizers stepped in and asked him to stop. This was a silent vigil, they said, and it should have prayerful, non-violent silence. The boys were crushed, but Swamiji accepted the restriction and began silently chanting on his beads. A dignitary stood up before the assembly and made a short speech in which he mentioned Gandhi. And then he turned to Prabhupada and indicated that he could now speak about peace. Standing erectly, the United Nations skyscraper looming behind him, Swamiji spoke in a soft voice. The world must accept that God is the proprietor of everything and a friend of everyone, he said. Only then can we have real peace. Mr. Bogart had scheduled the Swami for 2 hours of silent prayer. Prabhupada had the devotees sit together and softly chant japa until their 2 scheduled hours were up. Then they left. As Prabhupada rode back downtown in the heavy morning traffic, he said New York reminded him of Calcutta. Amid the start and stop motion and noise of the traffic, he explained, we have nothing to do with peace vigils. We simply want to spread this chanting of Hare Krishna. That's all. If people take to this chanting, peace will automatically come. Then they won't have to artificially try for peace. And of course. September 1st. The New York Post newspaper ran a picture of Swamiji's group at the United Nations building. Steve brought the clipping into Prabhupada. Swamiji, look, they have referred to you here as Swami Krishna. Prabhupada, Swami Krishna, that's all right. In the picture, some of the boys were sitting with their heads resting on their arms. Where are you? Prabhupada asked. Steve pointed. Oh, you chant like this, with your head down? Prabhupada had participated in the Peace Vigil to oblige his contact, Mr. Bogart. Now Mr. Bogart was phoning to offer his appreciation and agreeing to visit the storefront. He wanted to help, and he would discuss how the Swami could work with the United Nations and how he could solicit help from important people for his movement of Indian culture and peace. Prabhupada regarded Mr. Bogart's imminent visit as very important, and he wanted to cook for him personally and receive him in his apartment with the best hospitality. When the day arrived, Prabhupada and kids cooked together in the small kitchen for several hours. making the best Indian delicacies. Prabhupada posted Stanley downstairs and told him not to allow anyone to come up while he was cooking the feast for Mr. Bogart. Stanley assented, blinking his eyes with his far-off, saintly look. Stanley stationed himself downstairs in the storefront. A few of the boys were there, and he told them, "You can't go up to see the Swami. No one can." About 12 noon, Larry Bogart arrived, pale, elderly, and well-dressed by Lower East Side standards. He said he wanted to see Swami Bhaktivedanta. "Sorry," Stanley informed him, his boyish face trying to impress the stranger with the seriousness of the order. "The Swami is busy now, and he said no one can see him." Mr. Bogart decided he would wait. There was no chair in the storefront, but Stanley brought him a folding chair. It was a hot day. Mr. Bogart looked at his watch several times. A half hour passed. Stanley sat chanting and sometimes staring off blankly. After an hour, Mr. Bogart asked if he could see the Swami now. Stanley assured him that he could not, and Mr. Bogart left in a huff. Upstairs, Swamiji had become anxious, wondering why Mr. Bogart had not arrived. Finally, he sent Keith downstairs, and Stanley told him about the man whom he had turned away. "What?" Keith exploded. "But that was..." Within moments, Swamiji heard what had happened. He became furious. He came down to the storefront. "You fool! You silly fool!" He turned and angrily rebuked everyone in the room, but mostly Stanley. No one had ever seen the Swami so angry. Then Swamiji walked away in disgust and returned to his apartment. Stanley had been going off the deep end for some time, and now he became even more abstracted in his behavior. Stanley's mother knew her son had been troubled for years, and she had therefore requested Prabhupada to keep a very close watch on him. But now the boy deteriorated in his responsibilities and stopped cleaning the kitchen and storefront. He would stand alone looking at something. He was gloomy and sometimes spoke of suicide. And he stopped chanting regularly. The boys did not know what to do, but they thought perhaps he should be sent home to his mother. One day, Stanley went up to see the Swami. He came in and sat down. "Prabhupada." "Yes." Stanley: "May I have $50? Prabhupada: "Why?" Prabhupada used to handle all the money himself. So when his boys needed something, even if it were only 25 cents for the bus, they had to see Swami. He was never wasteful. He was so frugal that whenever he received a letter, he would carefully tear the envelope apart and use the reverse side as writing paper. So he wanted to know why Stanley wanted $50. Stanley replied in a small voice, "I want to purchase some gasoline and set myself on fire." Prabhupada saw Chuck at the doorway and told him to call Bruce at once. Bruce quickly came up and sat with Prabhupada and Stanley. Prabhupada told Bruce, whom he had recently appointed to handle petty cash, to give Stanley $50, and he had Stanley repeat why he wanted the money. "But Swamiji," Bruce protested, "we don't have that much money." "There you see, Stanley," Prabhupada spoke very calmly. "Bruce says we don't have the money." Then they phoned Stanley's mother. Later, Prabhupada said that because Stanley had asked for $50 for gasoline, which cost only 35 cents, he could therefore understand Stanley was crazy. Stanley later on became Swedish. Keith was cooking lunch in the kitchen as usual. But today, Swamiji was standing by the kitchen stove, watching his pupil. Keith paused and looked up from his cooking. Swamiji, could I become your disciple? Yes, Prabhupada replied. Why not? Your name will be Krishnadas. This simple exchange was the first request for discipleship and Prabhupada's first granting of initiation. But there was more to it than that. Prabhupada announced that he would soon hold an initiation. What's initiation, Swamiji? One of the boys asked, and Prabhupada replied, I will tell you later. First, they had to have beads. Keith went to Tandy's leather company and bought half-inch wooden beads and cord to string them on. It was much better, Swamiji said, to count on beads while chanting, a strand of 108 beads to be exact. This employed the sense of touch, and like the Vaishnavas of India, one could count how many times one chanted the mantra. Some devotees in India had a string of more than 1,000 beads, he had said, and they would chant through them again and again. He taught the boys how to tie a double knot between each of the 108 beads. The number 108 had a special significance. There were 108 Upanishads, as well as 108 principal gopis, the chief devotees of Lord Krishna. The initiates would be taking vows, he said, and one vow would be to chant a prescribed number of rounds on the beads each day. About a dozen of Swamiji's boys were eligible, but there was no strict system for their selection. If they wanted to, they could do it. Steve. Although I was already doing whatever Swamiji recommended, I sensed that initiation was a heavy commitment. And with my last strong impulses to remain completely independent, I hesitated to take initiation. End of quote. Prabhupada's friends saw the initiation in different ways. Some saw it as very serious, and some took it to be like a party or a happening. While stringing their beads in the courtyard, Wally and Howard talked a few days before the ceremony. Wally says, it's just a formality. You accept Swamiji as your spiritual master. Howard, what does that entail? Wally, nobody is very sure. In India, it's a standard practice. Don't you think you want to take him as a spiritual master? Howard, I don't know. He would seem to be a good spiritual master. Whatever that is, I mean. I like him and his teachings a lot. So I guess, in a way, he is already my spiritual master. I just don't understand how it would change the situation. Wally, neither do I. I guess it doesn't. It's just a formality. Nine o'clock. Should we end here? So in this reading, there was this extraordinary episode of Stanley requesting Srila Prabhupada. Not Stanley, what's his name? Yeah, Stanley. Later on, Swedish. $50 for purchasing gasoline, committing suicide. So It is very extraordinary here in this dialogue and how Prabhupada deflected this drama. Prabhupada did not answer the question of suicide, but he asked Bruce, that is later on Brahmananda, whether there was sufficient money to give to Stanley. And Brahmananda said, no, sorry, Prabhupada, no, there is no money. So Prabhupada told Stanley, see, there is no money, so we cannot give you the $50. So the drama was over like this. So it is very incredible how Prabhupada could solve the matter in such a way as not to offend anybody and not to discuss about the position of Stanley. Just because of question of money, he could not be satisfied like that. But he understood, Stanley understood, yes, there is no money, so I cannot do anything now. So the whole problem was solved in this manner. And so the next item regarding initiation. Before that, the vigil at the United Nations. Another time, the devotees, along with Srila Prabhupada, went to United Nations building and had a kirtan, and they were distributing the this booklet. What's in that booklet? On chanting Hare Krishna. Huh? That booklet on chanting Hare Krishna. You have seen that booklet? I don't know if it's not in print anymore, I think. BBD is not printing that. But I have one copy here with me downstairs. Anyone who can take photo and can distribute on chanting Hare Krishna. So that booklet is mentioning the quotation from Bhagavad Gita that Bhoktaram Yagdatabasam Sarvaloka Maheswaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Yadvamam Santim Ruchati. So that is a peace formula. And in this booklet also there is an explanation of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So in this way they went to the United Nations at that time and had a kirtan that was welcome. But in this particular episode here, they could not chant loudly Hare Krishna, only silently. But it has also its own effect. But some of the boys were called by the government to go to Vietnam War. Just to give an example, Achyutananda Swami, he was also drafted by the government and he was supposed to be caught by the army. So the procedure was that the boys were drafted. They had to go through a selection, some type of examination, whether they are in good physical health, mental health, and strong enough. And if they are strong enough in the good health, then they would be drafted and sent to Vietnam. So some of these boys here, they wanted to avoid the draft at all costs. And that was the case, for instance, of Achyutananda Swami, who at that time came to India and started his service to Srila Prabhupada in India, in Calcutta and in Vrindavan. In this way, he avoided the draft. Some other boys, they went to this examination and I forgot the name. And one boy, there was a question answer, no? And he answered in a very crazy manner, just like he's a fool number one, doesn't know anything. So he said, oh, you are not eligible, you go. We don't want you. Either he was successful in avoiding the draft. So anyway, Vietnam War. So at that time, many thousands of people were killed. The Vietnam at that time was under the control of the Communist Party, the Viet Cong. And for some reason, America wanted to check because that would be an help to Russia. So they wanted to counteract this communist domination in Vietnam and started a war. So many American soldiers were killed also. And so, anyway, any other questions regarding these episodes? Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.